I'm John Morse. I'm a member of the Tide Mill Institute, and Bud Warren and I were neighbors early on when Bud started the Tide Mill Institute, and I'm sort of hanging on, letting these guys that know more about it run the show. So I'm appreciative of them helping me put this together. It isn't, everything's not going to be about tide mills, because tide mills are interactive with other things that happen in our lives. So starting out, this is the Kennebec River. This is Bath Iron Works. That ship right there on the edge is one of the Zumwalt class DDGs that they built, and they only built one of them. You can see the Carlton Bridge behind where it goes across the river. You come down here, this goes downriver, Fiddler's Reach. This is Winnegance Creek in here, and this is what we call the mill pond. This is the old dam, and over here, you can't see it, is the new dam. And somewheres right in here is Maine Maritime Museum, and the replica of the Wyoming masts are sticking up. So this is probably revisionist history for me to be able to say that this is the tide mill capital of New England. But I'm going to throw it out there, and if anybody wants to challenge me on it, try it. So this is a collection of the most tide mills in one spot. There are 8 mills across here, and over here there's another dam here, and there are 2 mills there. So there are 10 tide mills. There's no other spot that's got 10 tide mills. So this is it. This is Winnegance on both sides of the water. This is actually the town of Phippsburg. We call this Timber Island. That's what I got on my license plate. And this is the city of Bath over here. And there's a wooden bridge between the two of them. That was probably taken sometime around the turn of the century, the 19th century, not the 20th. All right, this is my background. My family landed in Newbury, Massachusetts in 1635, and I am the 11th generation. And this shows the generations that were in Phippsburg. Daniel Morse came here, and he was who Morse's Mountain, if you know Phippsburg, was named for. And then these other here are people who have run sawmills. Richard Morse in the green, John Morse the first, John Morse Sr., and those 3 were involved with running a tide mill, or tide mills. And my father, who's the green down at the bottom there, he wasn't old enough to be involved in tide mills at that time. They had stopped when he got around. This is a chart of the picture that I showed at the very beginning, and you can see that down here is Winnegance Creek, comes in here, and this is the new dam, this is the old dam, and this is the bridge here, and here is Fiddler's Reach, and we're going down the Kennebec. Right there is another tide mill, Spinney's Mill is right there. Okay, this is an 1894 map of Bath. This is the old dam with the 2 tide mills on it. This is the so-called new dam with the 8 tide mills on it. And the new dam was authorized by the state legislature in 1835. You had to get authorization to block off water, and there were a couple of people got together and did that, and then they were always arguing about ownership, who was going to maintain what, and so forth, but it lasted until about the turn of the century. This is the oldest tide mill. Was built in 1794. And then this one was another one that was built by the Parkses. This was built by Colonel Lithgow, who lived over here on the peninsula. And my great-great-great-grandfather, Richard Morse, came up here in 1802. I think he had a partner, and they leased the old sawmill from Colonel Lithgow. Colonel Lithgow then died, and they bought it, as well as they bought this chunk of land here. This is the dams that held back the water. This is the dam where the 2 mills were, and this is shows a section of what the dam looked like before the ice and deterioration broke it all off. And the next, this is showing the thickness, bad picture, but it's showing the thickness of the plank, which were about 3 inches thick. All right, these are some drawings that were done by Sam Manning over to Camden. He's very good about drawing pictures. So this is a vertical view of the dam and the mill, and these are the doors here, right there. And I've got a bearing up there that's my artifact, 2 bearings actually, that there are posts right here, and these doors, you see, they open, and the tide comes in this direction and goes out in this direction. So when the tide is coming in, the doors are swung open by the force of the tide, and the water goes in through until you get high tide, and then the doors will swing shut and holds the water there until you get a head of water of about 2 or 3 feet, so that will run out of the sluice gate right here, and then it interacts with this turbine that's going to be put down in a position here, and it will turn the turbine. And this, it shows some more of the doors. You see the door here is completely open, and when this door swings shut, this door swings shut. They come up against this piece on the bottom so that they're solid and can hold back the water. This is, Sam added this schooner here because you're going to be loading lumber. The logs will come in here into the mill, get sawed, lumber comes out here, and then they're going to load it onto a schooner. This is probably a small schooner because the water depth there is only going to be 6 or 7 feet, so it may set on bottom during low tide while they are loading it. Now this is another piece here. Here's the sluiceway, and they're setting the turbine here is being set down into this box there, so that this water will come out and go into that. Sam is an over east guy. He's got his little pea pod here. That's his trademark on the drawings, is the pea pod there. The pea pod wouldn't work around the tide mills. Probably be a flat bottom skiff or something of that nature. This is showing more of the construction. This is the penstock here, and you can lift up this gate that goes into the sluiceway that puts the water into the turbine. There was a story about when the saw was running, when they had the mill running and the saw was running one day, and all of a sudden they didn't have any power. And someone looked, and they looked around and wondered what it was, and finally they figured out that there was a sturgeon, big fish, caught in the sluiceway, and it had virtually shut the mill down. This is more of here you see the penstock, the sluiceway, and here is the shaft coming up through from the turbine that's down here in the box. Now, I don't think there are pictures here, but there are big bull gears on top here, and they interact with other shafts and machinery and so forth, and belts to put it all together. This is an actual turbine here. This is my father when he was 8 years old, sitting on top of the turbine. I believe that the mill, the second mill, was beside this here, and I think that they tore it down, and I think that the turbine was saved as for spare parts. You can see in the turbine here, you can see the fins that are what makes the water gets in here, and it causes it to turn around, turn. Don't ask me in what direction. Okay. Harry and I got a little carried away, and we got too many of these pictures of, I guess this is artifacts. And these were taken in 2012 on a low run of tide. The mill the mill stopped operating in 1933, so it was available to the elements and everything, and it deteriorated and dropped into the mud, so to speak. This is a big pulley. I don't know what you'd call these that hold it together, but you see the length of these planks goes all the way around, and then you're going to have a pulley that is going to be this diameter in that. This is a broken bull gear. This is your shaft that's coming out of the top of the turbine, and this sets up on top of it. It has wooden teeth. These are wooden teeth in here. I'm not a scientist to figure out why they use wooden teeth to interact with steel or whatever, but you guys can discuss it and figure out why. Well, yes, but it could have been steel, made out of steel, then you wouldn't.
You want an answer now or later?
Sure, go for it. Maple. Wow, you got the artifacts then, haven't you? This is another picture. You can see this is the top of the turbine and the shaft coming up, and here's the bull gear with the teeth sticking out. Harry and I got carried away, and we got too many of these pictures in there. Okay. The tide mills, most tide mills that started out were up and down saws. And along about the time of the Civil War or a little thereafter, and when the owners of the mill could afford it, they switched over to rotary saws. But this is an example of the up and down saws. You've got the bowl gear with your wooden teeth there. You got this shaft over here, and this is all connected. And then you've got an arm on your pinion on the end there, and so that the saw is going up and down. This is a double mill in one of the buildings, because you see in this one here, this is a right-hand saw. So, no, this is the left-hand saw. So he's taking the boards off of this side of the log, and this one here is taking the boards off of the other side of the log. So you've got two mills here actually in one building. That's more bull gear. All right. There is the shaft. You've got your pinion here, and over here, this would be a big pulley that was, so this was driven by a big belt. And you shaped the boards around this so that you had a circular pulley. And so this is a 175-year-old artifact. And that came from the mills before Civil War. And I think it probably came out of that original mill, the 1794 mill. More artifacts here, different angle. Some more. This is interesting because here is a fin from the turbine, a couple of fins that came out of the turbine as it came apart. Here's the bull gear again. These are bed logs that the mill was built on, you can see. And these are well preserved because they're underwater. When timber and stuff like that, when they get air, then they will rot. But if they stay underwater, they will last for a long, long time. This is somebody could bring up the cant dog that I've got in the back there. This is Sam Manning showing the layout of a mill. Okay, so this is the dam here, and you can see the tide comes in, opens the door, and the water and stuff comes in, and then it closes when you're going to turn on the power. So you see the doors are closed here, so the power is on. So we have what we call a slip here, and we have a cable from a winch hooked onto the log to haul the log up into the mill. And I brought over a PV, an example of a PV. See, this guy's got one, this guy's got one. When this log gets up there, and they've finished sawing this log that's on the carriage here, they will roll that log onto the carriage and secure it and start sawing that log. They also will be flipping this log over to get your square edges. See, he's got one square edge. You drop it down, get another square edge, turn it again, get another square edge. So Sam has forgot to put rolls out here. The lumber comes off of the carriage and goes on the rolls, and they pile it out here on the platform on the other end of the mill. And he had a picture of a schooner, and you could load it on where it was tied up to the end of the platform here. You often wonder that we're operating back in the 1850s or something like that. How do we work a tide which is when it's dark? Well, You just have a belt-driven generator right here, and that makes for lights in the building, so that you can saw when it's dark. One of the things here is it talks about a slab cutoff saw, probably making 4-foot slabs. Slabs and firewood was big business back then. You know, it was, and not everybody had oil or anything in there in the house. The kitchen stove had coal, slab wood, whatever, or you had slab wood in the furnace or whatever, and there was a good business in that, and the schooners would come in, they'd load a schooner with a load of slabs, take off for Boston with the thing and sell it. Any questions about that? This is when this door opens, when the tide is coming in. You're going to get logs delivered out here in rafts. When the door opens, you put the doors in here. They're going to be floating around in this pond in here. So when the tide gets high, why then you hook this cable on down here with dogs onto the thing and haul it up this slip. When the tide is running out in that direction, the logs that are in the pond are going to float down towards the mill. All right, this is the mill, the 1794 mill here, and it's taken from the shore looking out there, and you've got the dam across here. This is Mr. Parks's house, and he had there was a tide mill on this side that was torn down, I think. So this, I'm guessing this was somewhere in the 1920s or something like that. But you can see this is the pond, and there are logs floating around in the pond, and they would come over and get them on the slip and haul them up into the mill, and then they come out the other end. This is looking from the east to the west. This is a picture of when the two mills were there. And you can see that this is an incoming tide because there are no logs here. They have not floated down against the dam. There is the outgoing tide with the logs down against the dam. And you see there is what they call a boom right here, chains hooked together or something to separate Parks's logs from the Morse's logs that were over on this mill. So they're sort of sorted out. Now you're looking back over at the other side. Here are the other 8 mills right there. Here is the shipyard. The Morses had a shipyard, and that's where it was right there. Yes, no grist mills or any of that, it's all sawmill. Okay. When you bought logs from somebody, you had to get them down to the river so that they could be rafted down to the mill or somebody else's mill. So this is a picture that's taken, I've written down here about 1927, 1928. Here again is my father up here, so he's about 10 years old, and this is his cousin beside him. This is my grandfather here. This is the guy that's the teamster with the oxen. This guy here probably owns the woodlot, and this is a guy that probably cut the logs. But if you look, you've got logs that are probably 15 to 20 inches in diameter, 16 feet long, so that's about 200 board feet to a log, so that's 2,000 board feet. That's essentially a half of a wheeler truckload of logs today. It's right there. And they're hauling them down to the water, and then they're going to float them. This is a picture of a it's an up and down saw. You get it's cutting on double edges. So the log or the timber or whatever is going back and forth here on the carriage. So it's cutting both ways, so to speak. And you can see the big band up here that's probably hooked to the bull gear someplace. Okay, this is another picture of the eight sawmills that were on the dam. I think that this is probably pretty close to the turn of the century, because you see there are no mills here. They had a couple of fires and about 3 of these mills on this end burned. And you can also see that there is a gap in the dam here, so that when they couldn't afford to take care of the dam and only 2 or 3 guys were out of the 8 were working, they didn't want to spend the time to fix the dam. So this is the interior of the sawmill, of a sawmill. This is your circular saw here. All right, this is a carriage here. You've got the beds on the carriage. And if this were a right-hand saw, which I think it is, your carriage is going to be back here. You're going to roll a log onto the carriage, and then it's going to go by the saw and drop off the slab, the board, the plank, or the timber on this side over here with a set of rolls that are going to go down towards the outboard end of the mill. Here again, this is the old dam with the 8. There were 8 mills on it, but you can see the dam is gone. These mills have burned down, so the dam is essentially shut down at that point. So it was probably 1902 or something like that. Here are the other 2 tide mills over on the other dam that's over here in Mr. Parks's house. This is a picture of the oldest tide mill. This is the first one, the 1794, but this is also the last one that was running that was shut down in 1933. And you can see it's on the dam. The other tide mill is gone. I'm guessing that this one is shut down, and you can see that it's deteriorating here. But here are the logs. It might be running because these logs over here are boomed up for that side. These logs over here must be boomed up for the new mill that was over here. Here is another picture of the big dam. You got a hole in the dam here, but this one looks like it might still be running if they get enough water. And then you got 2, 3 mills here, 4. And then over here, this is a planing mill that was up that the Morses had up on the shore, and I think there was a shaft probably from the bull gear from this mill that went up there and allowed the planing mill to operate, because the shipyard was right here on the other side. Over here, this is newer than 1902, because this is Dublin Point Light, which was built in 1902. And here is a schooner coming up the river to deliver or get something up in Bath, I presume. Doesn't look like it's going to come in here. Sometimes they anchored out here and they used a barge or something to get the lumber from here out to the ship and load it on out there if it was a bigger vessel. All right, this is the end of this is the Phippsburg end of the dam. And this is Morse's sawmill here. And I think this was shared with Mr. Parks or his son, and this wide slip comes up, but there's probably a saw running in this half of the mill and then a saw running in this half of the mill. And this is the planing building here. You can see this is a boom that's holding the logs separated for each of the mills. And here's another boom here, and you've got logs that are in, and these guys on the end of the slip are picking out the log that they want that's going to enable them to get a 20-foot 2x12 or something. This is taken from the bridge that is over here and looking out towards the river, and you're seeing the mills that are there. This is a better view of them, the slip where the logs went up in, and then this was the planing building here where they planed the lumber. They had to plane the lumber because the stuff that you used for decking or planking on a vessel had to be the same thickness, so you got a smooth surface when you put it all together. This is what's happened. A friend of mine, name of Steve Wilson, took a picture, and this is probably, I don't know, maybe 2010, 2012, or someplace in there. This is where the mill was. This is rock, and the mill set on top of this, and then the tide came in through here or whatever. So this is low tide. You can see the flats out here, and this is the Kennebec River out there, but this is the shore. So this is the same. This is what it looks like today. Okay, the Morses built ships, and this is the last one. This is the last one that they built, and it was called the Winnegance. But then it was sold, and it was the John L. Martino. And it was the last vessel that they built, approximately 150 feet long, and it was built in 1890. The Morses built 26 ships altogether. 13 of them were in Bath because dealing with the mud flats and launchings was kind of difficult. One ship was launched, and it went onto the flats on the other side of the channel, and they had to wait for high tide to get something to haul it off with, so they went to Bath to do that. This is a very interesting picture too. All of these gentlemen are 80 years old or older. And they're lined up in front of this is Perry's store on the Phippsburg side, and this is Mr. Perry here, the store owner. And these three gentlemen here owned tide mills. This guy owned the tide mill that was clear over on the Bath side. This is my great-great-grandfather, and he owned the one on the Phippsburg side, and this guy was out in the middle somewhere. His name was Eaton. But this is very interesting. You look at this fellow here. He has a hook. But he was a big boy. You also look at how tall he is. See the top of his hat beside these guys? And you look at this hand here. This is what my father used to say. That guy really had a set of meat hooks on him. And so I don't think you messed, and his name was Small. So I don't think you messed with him very much. But this picture, it isn't close enough to see, but you see the eyes have been, somebody has taken a pen and penned in the eyes to make them dark, or the eyebrows, so that the picture has been modified. This was put on by the Tide Mill Institute, and there are several of us here today. We got a little bit extra. We're going back to this, to where we started in the beginning, and so that we can look and see, review what was here. And this was the old dam. There were two tide mills here. This is the new mill that was built in '57. It was concrete. My father got tired of burned down sawmills, so after two burned down, he built this one out of concrete. I stopped running this 10 or 15 years ago. Over here is where the other dam was. Right here is where the ships would have been launched out, and they'd have got stuck on the mud flats over here. So that's why they moved up to Bath to do some of the building up there. And I think that's the end. So.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. First, was your father's one a tide mill, the cement one?
No, the cement one was concrete. We stopped running the old tide mill in 1933 because electricity had come to Winnegance.
Okay.
So that was the end of the tide mills.
And of the 8, were they all different owners or one owner?
They were different owners, although there were, my great-great-grandfather owned a mill and a half, and he shared the other half with Fred Parks. Fred Parks happened to be the guy that owned the tide mill that was beside the old one on the old dam. So he owned two, so to speak.
In a 24-hour cycle, how many hours would a tide mill be able actually to operate?
Probably 5, maybe, or maybe 6. It depends on what it was. They used to, when the gates closed and they got they had to have like a 2 or 3 foot head of water. And as in the picture there, they usually would saw the big logs first because that's when they had the most power. And then when it got down so they didn't have that much, then they would saw the small logs and do that. But they get 5 hours or so out of a tide.
So it was only on the outflowing tide that they could do their
Right. There are tide mills that have been put together that go both ways. I'm not knowledgeable in that, but before the tide mills or the water powered mills, there were what they called pit saws. They were up and down, pit saws, P-I-T, and they were pulled up and down by people on top and bottom, and it was an up and down saw like that, similar to what was in the tide mills, and that's how they sawed lumber way back. Now you talk about the Maine's first ship was built in 1607 down in Pauper. How did they make the lumber for the planks for that? That was on a pit saw. That's how they did it. Now, the chart that had all of my ancestors on that, the Jonathan, who had a mill down to Ashdale in Phippsburg, and they called it Sawmill Corner, but he didn't have access for a lot of logs. So I'm guessing that he probably ran he was grinding grain with that mill. He had running water from a brook was how he powered that. And he was probably doing grain from.
If he's using a brook though, that's not a tide mill, is it? And
Well, no.
using the corn.
It's a water powered mill.
Yeah.
Well, you could have a water wheel in a stream or a brook or something. you could have a water wheel. Yeah, there were grist mills out there that were tide mills. Did that answer the question?
No, but that's.
Maybe somebody else from the
Well-
Tide Mill Institute.
Maybe
Pat.
the early mills could be undershot water wheels, or breast wheels. Boston, on the back bay, used breast wheels. It's a little unusual. Most tide mills, early period, really used an undershot. And then the movement toward reaction wheels, which is a form of turbine, takes place in the 1820s and 30s and later. But they're, in Boston, they found that the reaction wheels that were tested were not any better than the breast wheels. So they stuck with the breast wheels for quite a while.
Well, I know that mills that started off with overshot wheels oftentimes went to breast wheels because they just couldn't maintain sufficient water head
Well,
to run a
there's a lot of, that's a,
whole different kind of.
we can talk about it. That's a technical issue.
Yes, no, we've had enough.
But the tide mills variety is something that I think we should look into more, because they did a lot of things. In Boston, for instance, they had a chocolate mill, they had grist mills, they had a veneer mill, they had an iron works, they had a machine shop, they made rope, all of that done with tide.
Okay, we're gonna have to go, because we're really behind for lunch.